There are just a lot of cunts out there.
There's no cure for being a cunt.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger,
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan, we should put that on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy, how you doing?
Pretty good. I think we should touch on Jerry Seinfeld's heckling. I might just play some bits now before we get into it.
Yes. We have a genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East. He solved it. It's the Jewish comedians. That's who we have to get. They're the ones doing everything. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. They're going to start punching you in about 3 seconds, so I would try and get all of your genius out so we can all learn from you. It's a comedy show, you moron. Get out of here. Imagine if this guy actually did solve the Yes, so you're really influencing everyone here. We're all on your side now because you have made your point so well and in the right venue. You've come to the right place for a political conversation. Tomorrow we will read in the paper, Middle East 100% solved thanks to man at the Kudos Arena stopping Jew comedian. They stopped him and everyone in the Middle East went, oh my God, let's just get along. We can't do that.
We got a genius, everybody.
Yeah, so what do you think of that, Roger?
Look, I mean, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. Down to my core. I hate that it's happening in Australia. I hate that it's happening here, right? And I just, it's not surprising. I've been caught out a number of times in the CBD Palestinian protests, right? In fact, one time I couldn't get the car out because they were coming down Pitt Street, and so I watched the whole thing, right? And there are all sorts in there, but it just makes me sad that people would try to throw a brick at anyone who is Jewish, regardless of their association to what's going on halfway around the world in the Middle East, right? Jerry Seinfeld's a beloved entertainer. He's not political at all, He is Jewish. That's his only sin here. And I just feel really bad that they've taken this approach, right? And ruined the show for people. They've made an impact on him, and they're forcing him to take responsibility for something that genuinely has nothing to do with him, right? And I think that whenever this comes up around, the Jewish diaspora are being persecuted, it's always hosed down. No, they're not. Don't try to flip the script. They're not being persecuted, whatever. They're claiming that, anti-Semitism is just criticism about anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitic and all this kind of stuff. And this to me proves that that's just all bullshit, right? Yes, they're being opportunistic, these protesters, because it's a big event and it'll get news coverage. But I'm just sad that it happens in Australia. It's just... I feel they should be dealt a very harsh penalty.
I think the devil's advocate on that would be, they would say, well, yes, Jerry Seinfeld is Jewish, or I don't know if he's of Jewish faith, but he's certainly culturally Jewish. But the real reason he's okay as a target is because he went to Israel in support or showed some sort of solidarity for what they're doing, right? Or he made some public... I don't know the details of what he said or didn't say, but that's that's how they'd wash it, right? They'd wash it through this filter of no, we weren't saying that because he's Jewish. We were saying it because he supports Israel. And that's how they'd spin it. And I think this is where the lines get really blurry, because actually, you know what? I think that's okay. Like, I think if we're talking about protests in a like liberal democracy, like, yes, they ruined his show, and it was, I don't even know if they ruined the show, because I thought his comebacks were pretty good, right? I thought it was like funny as a result.
Yeah,
of,
they ruined the second show, is what I've.
Well,
what I understand.
I mean, but at least in that little clip, I mean, his comeback, like, yeah, like he's right, like, you know, he's touched on, I think, like some of the things we talked about today, like, yeah, you've solved it, you know, you've solved the Middle East, you're a genius, you know, that's kind of, I think, what we're reacting to today, but the whole anti-Semitism thing, like, I think this is where it's grey, because it's eye of the beholder stuff, right? And I think, and coming back to the comment of, like, if you don't really know this stuff, you should just, like, stay out of it, kind of thing, because some of this stuff that gets spoken,
it's obviously that he's Jewish, though, man. Like,
it's
because he's a Jewish icon, right? Like, and you can't expect, like, this is where he gets caught up, right? And I think it's a bigger picture that other people have done around.
No, but I think he's now a target because I don't know what, like, because wasn't there that thing at that American college or whatever where he was awarded some honorary degree or something like that, and then there was like a protest movement in the United States, or there was some sort of protest at that ceremony or whatever, and I'm not sure what, but that's why it's been copied and pasted over here, because he's seen as like, oh, this is someone we can protest because it's going to make the news, it's going to, like, it's going to feed into that narrative. So I don't know that it's necessarily, oh, Jewish guy, let's go and, like, protest. Like, I don't think it's that blatant. I think that it's like a bit like a meme,
because
right?
he's a high profile Jewish person. There's a healthy dose of the fact that it'll get picked up, and that is, you know, that is exactly what protests are meant to do.
Yeah,
right?
but I think to me, I think there's, like, whether that's genuinely what's motivating them or not, or whether they've, like, come up with enough plausible deniability to protect themselves.
Yeah.
I just think, to me, the point is that it isn't, like, at the end of the day, you can't know the intent of the protesters. Like, I genuinely think the people who actually were at that show who protested, I think they literally just copied what they saw happen in the US. Like, I like, copy and paste. I don't think they probably haven't even watched an episode of Seinfeld in their life. They probably don't even know who he is. Like, they don't know that much about him. That would be my starting point. But then coming back to, like, what is the relevant point here? It's that, like, you can think that your actions are coming from a good place, but I think there's been total disregard, or at least among some people, there's total disregard for how one group in our community is receiving a lot of these sorts of things that are happening, and they're receiving it as an attack on them, and and it's, as I said, it's bringing up trauma of the past. And there's just a lot of, like, carelessness. There's just a lot of, like, and I was saying to you, I watched the Netflix documentary about the Second World War, and they kind of go through, you know, part of the, you know, all the, like, sort of what led up to the Holocaust and all, you know, the Jewish problem. What are we going to do about the Jewish problem? Like, this isn't, like, made up conspiracy that we've got to kind of, that's just this fiction that they're reacting to all of they're just hypersensitive or something. Like, no, they were, like, they had pogroms and stuff like that where they, you know, their livelihoods were taken away for no reason, and they were attacked and killed and murdered, and there was genocide. There are people alive today who went through that. Like, we can't just think that, you know, that this is just something from, like, you know, hundreds of years ago. This is in living memory.
I'll take a slightly less, like, I can understand what you're saying, but I'd take a slightly harsher approach than you. I think you're being quite sensitive to this idea of the right to protest or whatever it is. I don't think that there is enough that Jerry Seinfeld has done. He supports that. Basically, it comes back to this idea of Zionism, right? Jerry Seinfeld supports the right for Israel to exist, for the tenets of Zionism being a place, a cultural homeland for the Jews. And that's the sin, right? Like, I think that is not, that's enough. And then he's just a high profile target. I feel that him having to deal with this at every turn, every public kind of event is just, like, I feel like it's a crime. You know, like, it's such a shame that this is what's happening, right? And like, his sin is Zionism.
Well, I think so. I'm just going to read this short paragraph from a news article that I think gives some additional context that I'm speaking from, which is that Seinfeld. So this is a quote: like, Seinfeld has been outspoken in his support for Israel amid the ongoing conflict in Gaza. He made a trip to Israel last December and met with families of the hostages taken during Hamas's October 7 attack. He faced protesters in May while receiving an honorary degree at Duke University. So for me, I get that he is a strategic target, and he is someone that, like, he's a comedic icon of, like, he's Seinfeld. Like, it's this like undercurrent to the whole show, right? But that he's Jewish. But I think, again, like, it's like money laundering, right? You only need to, you make the money illegally, but then as long as you like funnel it through some other channel, you're all good, right? And that's what they're doing. They're saying,
mate.
No, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like,
I understand what you're saying, but like I said, what you read out, he's a Zionist. He supports the right of Israel to exist, and he supports Israel, right? Like, he is Jewish. He is allowed to do that. He's not supporting the military strategy of Israel, right? Like, he has always been a supporter of the state of Israel, Zionist, right? And you have to admit, that's the argument at the moment, right? Like, if you're a Zionist, you're a dirty, filthy person at the moment, as far as this kind of moral thing goes.
Yeah, but it's not just that he supports the concept of Israel. Like, he supported the actual, like, actions of the Israeli
the right to defend
government
themselves.
But then that's you adding that layer on, right?
See what I mean, right? Like,
no, but like, I think,
like, if you're a Zionist, you're going to have to support some kind of...
Let me give a different example. If Nigel Farage or someone like that, right, came out, and now if it was Nigel Farage, he would have probably been a lot more kind of definitive of his statements. In fact, I'm sure he probably already has in support of Israel, and he would be making very clear, like, solid statements in support of Israel probably, but nonetheless, like, if a public figure of that nature, like, he would be protested by these kind of people too. Right, and as far as I'm aware, Nigel Farage is not of Jewish background. Now, whether in the minds of the protesters, there's, okay, yep, like, Jewish icon, high profile, like, we're going to get press, he's a good target. We can say it's not, like, just purely that he's Jewish that we're going after him, but, like, because we can say it's because we're protesting that he supports the actions of the Israeli government or whatever. We can attack him for that. And I do think it's perfectly legitimate to criticize Israel. Like you said before, you framed it as, like, the right to defend themselves. Like, well, that's putting a spin on it. No, that's not quite it, right? That's you can support their right to defend themselves without supporting the actions they're actually taking, which you could say is an overreaching from that mandate of just purely protecting themselves. Right?
I include that. Like, I include. Like, this is the problem with the whole conversation. There's so many, like, trigger words and trigger phrases that are used on both sides that it becomes like a caricature. It becomes almost like platitudes, right? Like, this idea of Israel has a right to defend itself. Okay, you wearing the Star of David? You wearing the Star of David? Like, where's the watermelon? I need to see more watermelon here. But all I mean by that is, if you believe in the right for Israel to exist and you're a Zionist, then you are going to believe and support some kind of response against the situation, right?
So I think,
and you may not agree with the military strategy, and quite frankly, no one in this side of the world is qualified to talk about what that strategy would be, but you will agree that there needs to be a response, right? And that's totally, like, congruent with supporting, you know, the legitimacy of the state.
Yeah, but I think just to take a step back here, we're talking about protesters. What, like, the effect of the mindset of a protester is now, and as misguided as they are, and I think I think we're on the same page in terms of like the stupidity or the lack of thoughtfulness of protesting Jerry Seinfeld. But I just think, as a general proposition, if we're to say, like, let's say we're to say, oh, you know, this should be like, because I think you said, oh, they're punished or something like that. Well, I don't think that's the case. I mean, maybe they should be banned from Kudos Bank Arena or something, or future Seinfeld shows or whatever. But, you know, we live in a liberal democratic country. You've got to be able to tolerate this kind of thing. You've got to be able to tolerate protest. And I think to just say that any kind of, I mean, I guess where I'm departing from you a little bit.
You might say punished. I mean, like fined, right? Like,
well, whatever, right? Whatever. But like, I guess where I think we're departing a little bit is that I think what I'm trying to say, or what my point is, you can't just sort of like, it's equally dangerous if we start kind of saying, well, actually what they're really doing is we don't know anyone's intentions here. So we can't possibly know that. And so it's dangerous if we start saying, well, actually, like, Jerry Seinfeld's Jewish, so because of that, you just can't ever protest him and his view, or any other Jewish person and their support for Israel. And for that matter, you can't criticize Israel or the IDF, or actually, no, you just can't criticize Israel, anything Israel's doing, because it might be anti-Semitic, right? And that's this whole thing with this whole anti-Semitic thing, right?
Yeah. Well,
whereas I think yeah, I know, but I think this is
I do agree with you.
But this is like the whole. But this kind of situations where like the rubber hits the road, right? These are the edge cases which are hard to grapple with because it's not clear either way. Because I agree, like, I think the reason he's a target is because he's a high-profile Jewish person, right? But at the same time, he's also someone who's expressed a view about the conflict and about in support of Israel, and he's engaged in it. So I think you can't do that. Like, if Jerry Seinfeld was just disengaged, didn't make any comments, stayed in New York, and that was all he ever did, he just didn't say a single word about it, and then he had protesters, I'm all on board with you, and I'm like, actually, let's get, like, the Human Rights Commission to, like, go after these protesters. Like, I'd be even more brutal than you are, probably. But I don't think you can do that if you've put some skin in the game out there for people to latch onto.
Yeah, well, this is why I bring up the whole, because this is where it ends, right? Like, this is kind of the culmination is like the Zionism thing, right? Which it always goes back. It's the river to the sea thing. It's all this, right? It's like the right to exist, the right to return. That's where it comes back to, right? Like if you follow some of these threads, that is it a legitimate venture, right? Is a legitimate state, and when you have such fundamental disagreement at the lower levels, it's just, you know, it's just never going to be a conversation. But anyway,
I just think a lot of these things, like these terms like Zionism and anti-Semitism and all that, like a lot of the people engaging with very vocal views about this conflict don't really have any grasp of, right? Like they don't, like I think to characterize, you know, university students like camps on campus in support of Palestine as like anti-Semit or, you know, anti-Semitism. I don't even think they really even understand it. I just think they're literally just like, they're just taking the history that they know. Like, let's say in Australia, it might be like in the treatment of Indigenous Australians. It might be, it might be that they look at colonial history in other parts of the world. It might be they look at other kinds of like conflicts where, you know, there's been invasions or whatever, and they just like transplant their knowledge of one conflict to another as though you can do that, right? But of course you can't. And I don't think there's a lot of sophistication behind any of their understanding of this, and that's why I think...
Well, I want to believe there is a little bit, right? Like, put it this way. Okay, so when I was trapped by the Palestinian rally in Sydney CBD, I sat there and I watched the length of the rally go down Pitt Street from my vantage point. And apart from the fact there was a lot of children there, like prams, which was crazy. You know, it's like not I don't believe it's an environment for children. So let's just put that to the side for one moment. There was a very, very wide cross section of society there. A lot of inner city lefties for sure. A lot of blonde women with short bobs. But there was just a very, very wide range of people. And I refuse to believe that all of these people are just naive shitheads, right? Like, I think that yes, there are people who are there there are a lot of people there for the right reasons. And there are a lot of people there that probably do have a lot of knowledge. And I just I'm kind of craving a bit more of that, right? Like I want to understand that part a bit more, because I do think that to me, the Jewish side is much more nuanced and clear in terms of the logical aspects, but I'm not getting that from the protest side. And I'm curious, like I want to know, like what you would ask them, right? What to try to understand exactly what they want and just kind of peel it back a little bit to see whether it is what we're talking about, which is like naivety and just an identity thing and unwillingness to, they're transmuting very simple kind of worldviews in their head, or is there something there and it's just not getting through?
I think there's two. Like when I think of the typical people who go to a protest like this, right? I see kind of two camps, right, in my mind, right? And they're both very identity oriented. So the first camp would be people of like Middle Eastern background who there's like no, this is my side. Like I'm of this, like I support Palestine because like I'm from Jordan and I'm like, that's my people, right? And but that's very identity, like it's very identity based affinity, right? It's not I've thought about all the geopolitics of this and the history of it, and this is my view of it, right? It's purely like these people are like me, so I'm going to support them. Then the other group is like the sort of the progressive, like lefty kind of traditional, like the Noam Chomsky types, and who, have been calling for boycotts in councils from and again that's very identity based. That's very I'm going to support this cause because that's what people like me support, and I'm going to get on board and like go and march because hey, we go and have a drink after the protest, right? And it's fun and it's with my friends, without necessarily doing the work to think it through. I think these young people, apart from like wanting to sort of draw affinity, maybe they do have affinity with that progressive group, but I think often it's a lot of like what's so appealing about it for them is just literally on the news you see this big organized military bombing these like poor people, right, who are just defenseless victims, right? And that's the superficial take on it, and I think that's what attracts like the 20-year-olds on that side, and then why they've got such, because it superficially it's horrific. And October 7 was horrific, but you can do the utilitarian if you just look at the two events side by side and you look at which event, or the totality of everything that's happened since October 7, as in like the Israel response and October 7 itself, and you look at which one has caused the most and you just look at those two in isolation. You don't look at any of the other complexity or history or anything like that. Say which of the two.
Sorry, but that's like a body. So you're going down like the whole body count thing.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like there's virtually no way you can cut any interpretation of the two of like if you were distilling like the Israel response and all the consequences of the Israel response and October 7 itself and like the atrocities of Hamas, and you put them head to head, and if you exclude everything else, there's no way you can, like, one is objectively, like, you'd have to be doing some like mental gymnastics to try and argue that October 7 was the more bad event, right? And that's what young people are reacting to.
I don't think it is. And I think this is where we depart as well, because I feel that...
Well, like, okay, talk me through it, because I don't see how it's possible. It's like saying 100 is more than...
No, it's not. It's not.
One is more than 100. Like, it's not...
It's an interesting word that you use where you said you can't cut it, like, however you cut it, And I think there's a big difference between an invasion.
No, but I've excluded
And
all of that
cutting.
complexity, right?
But that's what I mean. You can't. Like, that's convenient.
I know you can't, but what
right?
I'm
You
saying
can't.
is
You
that,
can't exclude.
hang on, I just want to make clear, I'm not saying what I think. I'm saying what
No, I know. I understand.
these people are, how they're viewing it. They're viewing they're not looking at the history. They're just saying this 10-year-old boy got his slingshot out and shot someone, hit them in the arm, and they got a little bit of a bruise, and then the whole family's come with their AK-47s and have shot the boy's family. Like that. That's what they're saying, right?
This is the bit that's really hard for me, and I know it's not you saying this, right? So just kind of hear me out here. I understand what you're characterizing, but this is the frustration, right? Because there is another angle. That's one angle. The other angle is that the purpose, the intent, the maliciousness of, shooting someone in the vagina, cutting on them, nailing them, group rape, torture, the burning of children, like the cheering by civilians, bringing the hostages back, the raping of people at music festivals, like that's different, right? And like that, we can't get into this game where one person who has been sodomized, raped, and had knife wounds is worth more than one person on the other side. I understand that, right? One death of a Palestinian child, but that matters. That those details matter, right? Like intent matters, right? And I think this is the part that like I've got no time for, and I totally understand your caveats that like this is where you can see why like there's carnage on one side, there's a higher body count, and it's very hard to kind of rationalize, but it's different. It's absolutely different, right? Like the barbaric acts are different. There's a different pathology, and we can have arguments around that. But even taking away the history, even if you just start there, right? Those how the people have died in this conflict is very, very different.
I think,
and like that's I can't kind of get on board with like you said, if you were to say that, and I know it wasn't you, and you're doing it to illustrate, but this idea of like a slingshot has been fired into Israel and they've got a bruise on their shoulder. That bruise on the shoulder was like people dying in the most horrific way possible, like beyond what you can imagine, right? Like so, that's like a real life horror movie, man. Being shot in the vagina, nailed, pierced, multiple stab wounds, burnt alive, and like this stuff is not. I know it can be challenged, but it's been captured on body cam. There are reports. There's all this stuff, man. Like when are we gonna just recognize it is what it is, right? This is a different style of death and carnage compared to a military kind of operation.
So my comeback to that is that, like, it's one of these things in like, behavioral psychology, that if you show a poster to someone of one starving child, and you say, "Give now, donate to the cause of, of this thing," right? Because it's more vivid in your mind, right? That there's this starving child in front of you. That's more likely to get donations than the poster that shows 100 starving children, because people don't relate to the 100, right? And the corollary I'm drawing here is the vividness of those stories and the horrificness of those stories. They're just so profoundly horrific that it matters, but like at the end of the day,
those people are still there, man.
But if you've got 30,000,
think of this in a criminal sense.
How many people died on October 7 on the Israel side? Like 1,500,
I don't know the
2,000?
exact numbers. I think it was like 1,400 or something.
Okay, so something in that order of magnitude. And you have 20 times the amount of casualties on the Palestinian side. That's not irrelevant. Like, in some ways, the systemic, like, industrial scale, like... Now, I get there's strategic reasons. I get the predicament. I mean, we've talked about it, so I'm not debating that, because I'm not challenging that at all. But for it just to be for the death toll and the impact to just simply be ignored, or not, or just say, oh, it doesn't matter because they're doing it in a more genteel way. You can't do that. Like it does matter.
Yeah.
It does matter.
It does matter. It does matter.
Magnitudes matter.
If these people that have created these, that have committed these atrocities, are still out there, and they're trying to neutralize that threat and bring them to justice and bring back the hostages, that's a totally different thing. And I started as I included that in my side. You can't try to compare and make a kind of coefficient for the amount of pain, but intent does matter in terms of how, why they died and how they died.
But that's not how people are viewing it. And someone like a Sam Harris, if he was listening to this conversation, he would say, "Oh, Andy's just confused. He just doesn't understand it." Because, actually, orders of magnitude between the two sides don't matter, because one is fundamentally coming from, an evil disposition, a barbaric disposition. One is just trying to mitigate losses and coming at it from, just defending themselves, just trying to figure this shit out, right? But my comeback to that would be simply that, well, magnitudes do matter. Intent plus negligence still leaves you culpable. So you can have positive intent, but if you're negligent, you're still culpable. So you can have, an example might be, do the Allies have any culpability for, let's say, Dresden, the bombing of Dresden, the complete destruction, or do they have? Now, if you said to me they have zero culpability, I wouldn't agree with that. I think, was it the right thing to do? We don't know, because we don't know what the counterfactual would have been. But every decision that gets made, you can't just say, oh, well, it was all for a good purpose, we can do whatever the fuck we like now.
No, I don't think you can say that. But I don't think there's not even an agreement, under that scenario, right? That kind of comparison. It's like saying that, okay, the bombing of Dresden is a way in which they're trying to achieve their objective, but no one denies the objective.
No, I don't think so.
Do you see what I mean? The people deny the objective of Israel. And I think that's the bit that, you don't even get to that stage, right? I think that if you were to ask people around, do you need to respond to remove Hamas, or to neutralize or bring those people to justice and get the hostages, I don't even know you get a strong yes answer.
I'll just touch on that. So I think a lot of the unreasonable people that we're on a unity ticket in railing against, that we've talked about for most of this podcast, I agree with you on that. And the 22-year-olds and all of that, I agree with you. They in fact, they haven't even thought that far about it. They're very naive, right? But I guess what I'm trying to draw out here is that a lot of the more nuanced and sensible opposition to what Israel's doing, that is actually coming from the right place. And I would say this is where, there's got to be some limits where you say, hey, all right, these numbers are getting... Now, I actually haven't been following, the numbers, as though they're this, COVID case counts or something, but, okay, maybe, when Sam Harris first started talking about, what you don't understand, you're confused, right? That, the numbers of deaths, you can't draw an equivalence, right? Okay, that was when maybe there was 5,000 deaths in comparison to the 1,400. All right, what about when there's 10,000 deaths? Oh, no, it still doesn't matter. Okay, what about 30,000? What about 100,000? At what point? Yeah. And there is a point.
He doesn't say it doesn't matter, though.
But I guess what I'm trying to draw out is that people like myself and people who are on the more the good faith critical of Israel side, they're not critical of Israel's right to exist, or they're not supporting river to the sea or any of that stuff, but they're genuinely And maybe they're even acknowledging their own limitations of their understanding of the conflict, as I would. But like, and the strategic response. But I would simply say that at some point, like, it doesn't smell right to me when you're talking like 30, 50, 100 times. Like,
let's cut
counts.
through that side of it.
Yeah.
Like, so we've been talking in, like, you know, conceptual terms. I'll put myself out there, right? So if you're someone who says that I support, like, I understand something needs to be done to neutralize the threat of Hamas, bring the hostages home, and bring the people who committed those crimes to justice, tick. I believe that is an objective that needs to be achieved. I do not agree.
But it's not black and white, because there's trade-offs with everything. You might say, well, if you can do that within this cost envelope, yes, tick.
Yeah.
But I'm not giving you a blank check to do whatever the fuck you like to make it happen.
I'm getting to that. So I'm trying to characterize where I would have time to agree with someone, right? Personally. If you're someone who can get the tick on that, right? I agree in the objective. Return the hostages, bring the people who committed those atrocities to justice, and dismantle or mitigate the threat. But I do not agree with the cost benefit. Like, I do not agree with the way in which you're going to achieve this mission, and there needs to be hard parameters around human life. Right? No problem with that. I agree with. Look. And then it becomes a matter of how you do that, and can you do that, right? And I think that's probably where most of our differences lie, is that maybe we have a bit of and both from a place of naivety, because we're not, we don't have the information, we don't have any military experience, we don't have anything that would make us remotely credible in this situation. We're just two people talking. But that's where we probably depart, that you see it as almost like you can't do it, and strategically it may not be the right thing, so if that's your objective, you're not going to be able to do it militarily. That's fine. But if you get to that stage, then that's fine. Like, I respect that. That is well on the path to having a nuanced view that you are wrestling with and that you're trying to kind of come to grips with. Yeah. And the reality is you can't know. Like, what's the right strategy to achieve those objectives. But most of it, man, is like, you have to be honest with the situation that we find ourselves in. Most people aren't at that mission. They're not. You're not going to get the yes to that mission. And I think that's probably the problem with a lot of these other things that we're seeing. Like, I think that's where it's a bridge. It's beyond the pale for me. It's like, not only do they do, you're talking about mental gymnastics, they do the mental gymnastics to say that to undo every link in the chain, October 7th atrocities didn't even really happen. You've got no proof that even happened. You're over-exaggerating, and blah, blah, blah. And they go back and back and back and back to the point of that eventually that I led to before, which is, you're a Zionist, you believe, and you're a filthy Zionist who wants the blood of children and genocide, and I don't believe Israel should exist, and you need to dismantle it. Right? So all of this stuff up until that point is nullified. And I think those are the loudest voices on social media right now.
Yeah, all right. Can I pick up on that last bit, the loudest voices? I think if you push the most outspoken, or at least those most willing to be outspoken on this topic, you'll push into some like rhetoric of that nature, where they're like, actively, no, I don't support Israel's right to exist. There's their colonialist history, blah, blah, blah. They'll come up with all these sort of lines of that nature. I think that's true. But I think it's like with anything, that's not necessarily true of the majority of people who are pro-Palestine, right? Or at least who, like the whiteys, the 22-year-old whiteys who might post like a virtue signaling post on social media. Like, I don't think they've even grappled with that question. I don't even think they know that that's a relevant question to ask. The question around, does Israel like have a right to kind of go in and defend itself and dismantle Hamas or whatever. But bringing this back to Jerry Seinfeld, now I think what was a little bit unsavory about the protesters is that, they chanted like "River to the Sea" and la da 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 da. If they were at that show and I don't know, I don't know how you'd come up with an equivalently pithy statement as From the River to the Sea to compete with it, but let's say something a little bit more nuanced, right? Let's say a catchphrase that was a little bit more nuanced. So they did the same thing where they went to the show, they screamed out, heckled with a line, but it was, let's say the line was different. Let's say it was something to the effect of, IDF must show restraint or something like that, right? And that's what they yelled out. Like, I think that's fine, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. Like, I think that's fair game, and I think that's and if all the messaging, and I think a lot of people who are on the anti-Israel side, like, I do think the majority of people either fit into the camp of don't know, but just don't like the footage of seeing bombs going off in Gaza, and so they're just reacting to that.
Yeah.
Or they're just, or they have genuinely thought, I just want them to just be a bit more, like, I don't even think this is good for Israel. Like, they're just driving the next generation of terrorists against, they're going to do more rockets against them, right? And I think that's where a lot of it is. And then I think you have the extreme, there are definitely the extremes, which would have the slightly more, like, on-edge views. But I think, just to then circle back to the topic of anti-Semitism, which we were talking about, I don't think most people's public support for, like, Gazans comes down to anti-Semitic tendencies. I don't think that's what's motivating people. Maybe a bit of an absence of knowledge of history is a contributing factor, but not proactive anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and look, in general, like you said, the terms are not helpful because they shut down conversation rather than attempting to open a dialogue. But like a lot of things, I think that for a community that's so obsessed with safe spaces, there's no cultivation of a space to actually have a conversation, because I don't think that's what they want. I agree that that how you protest is also important, and that if you have, like, just a humanitarian point of view on this, I respect that too. All right, not that anyone needs my respect, but I'm just saying that that's someone who has a pure humanitarian point of view. They're not the problem, right? And in fact, they're probably part of the solution. This other stuff that we're seeing, that's part of the problem, man. Like, I don't know how else to say it. But
I know how to say it.
Yeah, going back to the whole store thing. Go on.
Oh, there are just a lot of cunts out there.
There's no cure for being a cunt. It's just, but what's the prognosis for these cunt bags, right? Like, I think that, going back to my other point, right? Like, I think that you can be rehabilitated pretty easily. In a lot of cases, like, think of, these aren't career activists, are they? Or is it too late? Like, that's the path that I just don't believe they have enough resolve to stay on this path unless they're rewarded with little breadcrumbs, little social media breadcrumbs along the way, right? And is nurtured by this kind of insidious force that we.
I told
we
you
have
they go for a beer afterwards. They go to a protest and then they go for a beer. Like that's what they're. It's a social thing. Most 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, or whatever age group you want to pick, aren't out there protesting. Aren't there, like,
do you reckon it's a good way to pick up chicks? Like, they actually
probably, yeah. They're probably it probably is for, but, like, the majority of young people aren't doing the things we're saying. Like, so there's a certain niche that are into it, and they're the same niche that when we're at uni would have been protesting about whatever the issue. I mean, they would have been the ones protesting about the Iraq War or whatever, right? And I think that's, like, you get part of, like, a club. Like, it's like you know, that's their thing. Like, that's their people, and I think that's what drives it. But I just don't like that you have, and I do think it is like a social identity thing, right? You don't have that, like, driving, like, their unsolicited input to a conflict that is quite challenging for people in this community, because they almost can engage in it for fun and for sport, whereas there's people who actually, you know, like, this is, they might have family, you know. So anyway, and we're maybe we're part of the problem.
Do you think it's our fault? Like, I do have this kind of problem, or I've been noticing this problem where what is old is new again, and there's no memory for the younger generations. Like, you've got people, many examples of that, people like having memes around Saddam Hussein praising him for being a strong Arab leader and like wanting him to come back, and some comments that obviously indicated they didn't even know he was dead. Where is this man? Get him back to the chair. And the whole famous thing on TikTok of, Osama bin Laden. Oh God, Osama bin Laden's letter to America, and it going viral, saying, "Oh man, this guy's making a lot of sense, right? Like, this guy is speaking my kind of anti-capitalism, that America has caused all this stuff, all this stuff on themselves, right? Through oppression of the Middle East and all this kind of stuff, and corruption." And I just wonder sometimes, like, and we said that with the Holocaust as well, the Holocaust Museum and all this kind of stuff, and the Nazis. Like, you mentioned that some 14-year-old didn't know who Adolf Hitler was, right? Like, is it our fault, or the Gen Xers, or the Boomers, for not actually handing this information down, this kind of historical memory? Like, isn't this really important? And that's something the Jews do really well, I will say. But, I mean, have we lost our traditions of actually kind of like educating the lessons of history?
Well, if they can learn it on a 1 minute TikTok, we'll be right.
You're going to talk to your kids about this kind of stuff?
No, everyone knows all about it. This is the kind of shit that the kids learn on YouTube these days.
Who's making the YouTubes?
I actually be curious to know how much he knows about this stuff, but I think, my son's 11, so I wouldn't necessarily expect him to, but this is the kind of stuff that like YouTube's good for, because they do get like little bits and bobs and sprinkled in, depending on what rabbit warren they're down, and then depending on which algorithm Google has placed him in, he'll either be pro-Palestinian protester or anti-Israel or pro-Israel.
Right. I want to end this episode with a question to you, and that is, if I was to commission my half Palestinian kafir and Star of David do-rag, who would be the most likely tailor to make it for me? A Jewish one or a Palestinian one?
I think you'd need to find a Norwegian one.
Sweet. Good answer. As long as they take cash, because they don't pay tax.